I think that Onyx Storm is a book, or maybe even that the Empyrean is a series in general, that is a really great example of a pretty good idea that is not being executed well. I do not think that the Empyrean series is great fantasy. I don't even think that it's good fantasy. But I also don't think that it's good romance. Now, I am the first to admit that I am not the world's foremost romance reader, but I also know that this isn't it. These books give me the vibe that Rebecca Yarros hasn't read very much fantasy, or at least the fantasy that she has read and is working off of for influence wasn't very good. When I reviewed Fourth Wing, I gave it a 3 out of 5. It wasn't terrible. It was clearly the first book in the series. It was setting the scene, so to say, so a lot of its misgivings were forgivable. At the very least, the compelling parts were compelling, and the action parts were entertaining. Flying around on dragons should be fun, like when Harry Potter learns to fly his broom. But everything in Iron Flame took a much more serious tone, and everything that was fun about Fourth Wing got tamped down in Iron Flame. And everything that was fun about Fourth Wing is just completely dead in Onyx Storm. The overarching issue with Onyx Storm, for me, is that there are approximately 3 likable characters in this entire story. Rhydock, Rhiannon, who's barely in it, and Sawyer, who is also barely in it. I also do like Brennan. Brennan is one of the few people that I respect in this story. Anybody else who's likable is not around. They're not part of it. Jesinia, the deaf librarian whom I love Jesinia. She's barely in this book. I think she appears on like 4 pages. I am not rooting for anyone in this story. Violet is unbelievably unlikable. Xaden is the most arrogant dork to ever take a whiff of Axe body spray and decide to make that a personality. And at every turn, I hope something bad happens to them. It would be very satisfying. Rebecca Yarros even managed to make the dragons unlikable. Tarn, everyone's favorite hulking lizard of death, is now the perfect embodiment of every grumpy old guy trope. When he's not lecturing Violet or continually threatening everyone around him, he is being offended by everything Violet says to him. "We would not be doing this if I did not approve. If I didn't want to do this, I would have left you on the ground. Stop questioning me, Silver One." Also, Silver One, shut up. "I am Tarn, Lord of Thunder, Terror of the Skies, first of his name. How dare you insult me, blah, 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 blah." Give it a rest, Pops. And Andarna spends all of her time whining and bitching and flinging middle school insults at everyone around her at every opportunity that she gets. And if we don't even like the dragons in a book about dragons, what are we doing here? We have nothing to care about. And everyone's dialogue is so completely drenched in sarcasm that every single conversation is eye-roll inducing. I found the romance in this book to be fairly comical as well, because aside from the whole forced proximity thing, because we have to be together because our dragons like to bone down, when Xaden and Violet aren't constantly lying and deceiving each other after continually promising not to do that, they act like not seeing each other for a couple of days is going to take them apart at the seams. You are fighting a war. Sometimes you're not going to see him for a minute. And the way that Xaden conducts himself with the whole, "Everyone is going to do what I say all the time or I'm going to kick their ass because I'm the big, dark, brooding shadow wielder guy and that's just what big, dark, brooding shadow wielder guys do," was tired 2 books ago. He is not a good leader. He is not a good partner. Neither of them are good partners. And Violet's inability to control herself and to put the fate of the world in front of her stupid boyfriend is continually infuriating. And yes, there's more nuance to it than that, but don't be pedantic. You know what I'm talking about. I don't need the lecture in the comments. When they aren't fighting, they're hooking up. When they aren't hooking up, they're dreaming about the next time they get to hook up. It doesn't even feel like they really like each other at all. They just have to be together because the story doesn't work otherwise. Not that it's working on a lot of other levels anyways. Also, I think in a fantasy like this, you need a compelling villain, and we do not get that in Theophany. Also, hi, Rebecca Yarros. It's me, Jeff. Theophany? That's the name you picked? In the whole wide world of names available to you, you went with Theophany? I think the prose in this book leaves a lot to be desired. She's very inconsistent in her tone. Sometimes it tries to read like a fantasy book, and the rest of the time it reads like a high school musical novelization. She's really bad at swearing, and the constant overuse of swearing comes off as immature and amateurish. Xaden often says things like, "I am well the fuck aware," Or we get things like, what the actual fuck? Or, I hope he takes them all the way the fuck out. Like she just got new swearing shoes and she's trying them out for the first time. I would also love for Yarros to crack a thesaurus and find some alternative phrases to utterly, comma, completely, complete and utter, and completely and utterly. She has a tendency to jump back and forth between very casual and sometimes weirdly rigid or formal sentences. At one point, Xaden says, "Your error was changing your assessment to targeting me as the threat and letting your eyes off her." Nobody talks like that after they just sucker punch someone in a bookstore. Do you even want your characters to be likable? And at one point, we also get, "You really shouldn't raise a blade if you aren't also prepared to receive one." Did she mistranslate this stuff out of the art of war, or like, what are we doing? This stuff tends to happen in combat quite a bit, but sometimes after doing like a trick or a maneuver or like some new cool magic thing, they will do like an anime monologue. There's this instance where Tarn breaks a wyvern's neck and then explains to Violet about how he broke the wyvern's neck. What are we doing here? We just watched him break the neck. I don't need him to explain how he did it. What she's doing is trying to demonstrate the skill and knowledge of her characters, but she's telling us instead of showing us, and a good author would just show us. And everything from Violet's POV is completely overblown. Everything Xaden does is the most attractive thing that anyone has ever done. Everything bad that happens to her is life-ending and the worst thing ever. And everything good is indescribably good. 10 chapters into this book, hell, 10 pages into this book, I was completely sick of hearing about Xaden from Violet's POV. I was sick of hearing about Xaden at all. Her obsession with him is honestly a bit repulsive. All of the Dragon Riders are excessively smug and self-righteous, and the Griffin Flyers are clearly the much cooler group of people, and I would prefer to hang out with them more. The world building is confusing and inconsistent, and Yarros struggles to carry over plot points and themes from book to book. Things that were a pretty big deal in Iron Flame are barely mentioned in Onyx Storm. And then things that happen in Onyx Storm that you think would be a big deal are like, hey, this could potentially be very important, just come off like bad fireworks. A little bit of spark, little puff of smoke, nothing happens. There's also a lot of stuff to tear apart in the plot here, but out of respect for my friends who love this series and the other content creators that I respect, I'm not going to do that. Onyx Storm feels like a book that is comprised completely of ill-advised and mishandled side quests. I think this series is popular because of how horny it is and some weird association with Violet's insane obsession with the King of Angst. I think this series has value as being a pretty good gateway into fantasy, but I don't think it's actually good at anything. Well, Fourth Wing was good at some stuff, but nothing after that. Read it if you're bored, but also I could recommend much better things if you're that bored. 3 out of 5 hammers.